Have you ever spoken to a British person and initially thought that the conversation went perfectly well, and then later realised that they may not have meant quite what you thought they meant? If so, you're not imagining things. British English is full of phrases and expressions that sound polite and friendly, or neutral, or even positive on the surface, but underneath they can be doing something quite different. British people often soften things. We understate things. We avoid being too direct. And quite a lot of the meaning is hidden in tone and context and not in what we're actually saying. So in this video, I'm going to decode 12 very common British English expressions and explain what people often really mean when they use them. If you've ever understood the words, but still felt slightly confused by the person, then you're in the right place. By the way, just a quick introduction. I'm Jo, and I work with adults who speak English as a second plus language. I make videos here on YouTube every week, so if you like the kind of content I make sure you subscribe. And if you're interested in booking a one-to-one conversation session with me, then check out all the information in the details below. I'd love to meet you. Let's get started. Phrase number 1, that's quite good. Now this sounds positive. It sounds like praise, but in British English, it's often much less enthusiastic than it seems. Very often, that's quite good means, it's fine, it's okay, but I'm not exactly blown away. This is one of those phrases where British politeness slightly disguises disappointment. If someone says, that's good, that's more direct and more approving, but that's quite good sounds considerably cooler and a little bit underwhelmed. For example, if somebody at work gives a presentation and the manager says, that's quite good, that person might walk away thinking, brilliant, smashed it. And I would say, just don't get too carried away. It's not exactly negative, it's just not very enthusiastic. Phrase number 2 is not bad. And this one means that something is actually really rather good. This is classic British understatement. British people very often express genuine approval in a very understated way, in a rather restrained way. So if somebody says that something's not bad, they may be properly impressed. For example, how was the meal? Not bad. That not bad could actually mean that it was excellent. And if they say not bad at all, well, this is high praise. So if a British person says that your pronunciation is not bad at all, definitely take it as a compliment. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3 is the simple word interesting. Now this one is dangerous because sometimes interesting does mean interesting, but sometimes it means, that's a bit odd. I'm not convinced. I've got quite a few doubts about this, or I'm not really choosing to tell you what I really think. Interesting can be a wonderfully polite holding word. It buys time, it avoids bluntness, and it kind of keeps things socially comfortable. For example, you tell somebody about your big new idea that you're excited about, and they respond, interesting. Now that pause is doing quite a lot of work. The key with this one is to listen to what they say next. If they follow it up with curiosity or enthusiasm, that's great. But if they say interesting and then immediately move on, it may not be the response that you were hoping for. Phrase number 4 is I'm not sure about that. And the real meaning of I'm not sure about that is usually I completely disagree. British people often avoid saying I disagree too directly. And this is in all sorts of situations, professional situations, social settings. We're desperately trying to be polite all the time. So instead of saying I disagree, we soften it. And we say things like, I'm not sure about that. It sounds gentle, but it sounds quite hesitant. But it can actually be quite firm. For example, if somebody in a group of friends says, I think we should plan a summer trip together, and somebody else responds, I'm not sure about that, then that probably means that from their point of view, it's not a very good idea. This phrase is also really useful for learners because it gives you a way to disagree with somebody without sounding aggressive. Number 5 is that might be difficult. And often this means probably not. This is a polished British way of saying no without saying no. For example, to your boss, could I take Friday off this week, please? And your boss replies, that might be difficult this week. It pretty much means no. The interesting thing about this phrase is that it sounds like it might still be open. It sounds like there might still be hope, but often there isn't. It's apologetic, diplomatic, and quietly very final. That might be difficult. Let's move on to number 6. It's not ideal. If somebody says it's not ideal, this means that there's a problem, and sometimes a fairly serious one. This is a really British phrase, again, because it sounds quite calm and under control, even when things are clearly going quite wrong. For example, imagine a situation where it's pouring down with rain, your train is cancelled, your phone is nearly dead, and your British friend looks around and says, well, this isn't ideal. And really this means this is a complete nightmare. British people love these tidy little phrases that makes chaos sound more manageable, and it lets you express frustration without being overly dramatic. Number 7 is we should have a coffee sometime. Now, this could be genuine. The other person could genuinely want to go for a coffee with you. However, it could just be a friendly, social ending to a conversation. This is one of those phrases that lives in the vague, hopeful future. Sometimes the person absolutely means it. And sometimes they mean it in a warm sense, but there's no real plan behind it. And then sometimes it's just a polite thing to say at the end of a conversation. For example, you bump into someone, you have a nice chat, and then when they go to leave, they say, we should have a coffee sometime. And then they follow that up with, are you around next week? That is real. There's a bit of intention there. However, if they say we should have a coffee sometime, and don't follow that up with any sort of intention to get your details, to get your number, to set a date, then they're probably just saying it to be polite. If you want to make it real, you could reply, I'd love that. Are you around next week? But don't be too surprised if they say, not sure yet. I've got quite a lot on my plate next week. I'll get back to you. Number 8 is the word sorry. Honestly, this word deserves its own documentary. In fact, I did make a video dedicated to the word sorry in British English. Sorry can mean so many different things. It can mean I apologise. It could mean excuse me. It could mean can you repeat that? It could mean I'm about to disagree with you. It could mean this is awkward. It could mean that I'm just about to start a sentence in a very British apologetic way where I'm almost apologising for speaking. Somebody might bump into you physically and say sorry, even though it's not their fault. Or somebody might say sorry on the phone, and that wouldn't mean they were apologising. It would mean that they couldn't hear you properly. If somebody starts a sentence with sorry, but, it means something uncomfortable might be about to happen. Like I said, I made a whole video about this word because there's so much to say about it. If you're interested in watching it, I'll put the link in the description below. But just remember, if a British person says sorry 5 times in a conversation, don't assume that they're in some sort of emotional crisis. It's often just how we move through the world, apologising for ourselves. The next phrase, number 9, is a bit. Now, the literal meaning of this is a small amount. The real meaning can sometimes be quite a lot. This is another useful bit of British understatement. British people often use a bit to soften things that are actually quite intense. So if somebody says, I'm a bit tired, it could mean that they're absolutely exhausted. If they say, I'm a bit worried, it could mean they haven't stopped thinking about this thing for 3 days and they haven't had a wink of sleep. If they say, it's a bit cold, it could mean it's absolutely freezing. If a friend of yours had been through something traumatic and you said, how are you doing? And they replied, I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest. It could mean that they're possibly hanging on by a thread, that they're not in a very good way. It's a really useful feature for learners to notice and to try using yourself. It makes your English sound a bit softer and more natural. Okay, let's move on to number 10. Number 10 is that's brave. So the literal meaning of this would be something like, well, that's courageous. The real meaning of that's brave, however, is I would never even consider doing that myself. And I might have quite a few doubts about your choice. This one can be genuinely admiring. Somebody might say to you, I've signed up to run a marathon. And you reply, that's brave. You're impressed, but you wouldn't do it yourself. Often it has a slightly amused or skeptical sort of edge. For example, if somebody said they were going to go camping in November, a British person might reply, oh, that's very brave. And the translation there would be, that sounds very cold, miserable, faintly alarming. You must be crazy. Phrase number 11 is, I wouldn't recommend it. And if somebody says, I wouldn't recommend it to you, it means that it was pretty awful, or I had a terrible experience. I wouldn't recommend it sounds quite calm and reasonable, but often it's a much stronger negative judgment. For example, have you tried that new restaurant? I wouldn't recommend it. That's not neutral. That is a warning. Again, British people often use this kind of dry understatement and avoid saying that something was completely dreadful, even though that's exactly what they mean. And it's quite a satisfying phrase to use. Very controlled, very British. On to number 12, our final expression, and it's a simple we'll see. Now, you might literally think that this means we'll wait and see what happens. But in reality, it means probably not. This is one of the gentlest ways of not giving a proper answer. It kind of keeps the door slightly open without promising anything. People say we'll see when they don't want to commit, or they don't want to disappoint someone, or when they'd like the conversation to just move on. For example, can we get a dog? We'll see. In this case, I would suggest that the child does not start choosing dog names. It's probably not going to happen. Or, are you coming on Friday? Somebody would reply, we'll see how the week goes. That often means probably not. But I don't want to give you an outright no. So if you hear we'll see from a British person, it's often worth treating as being uncertain at the best. So there you have it. 12 very British phrases that often mean a little bit more or a little bit less than the words themselves suggest. And the big idea underneath this all is that British communication is often very indirect and understated and shaped by politeness. It's not really about dishonesty. It's more about softening things, avoiding awkwardness, and trying not to make other people feel too uncomfortable. And once you start noticing these patterns, British people become a bit more easy to understand. If you enjoyed this video, it would be fantastic if you gave it a thumbs up, or even better, subscribe to my channel. I have a whole playlist dedicated to the quirks of British English. So if you enjoy this kind of video, you might enjoy that. And remember, if you'd like more support with your real life English and sounding more natural in conversation, then you can book a one-to-one conversation session with me using the link below. Oh, before I go, I mustn't forget to tell you, I also now create content over on Substack. I'm posting there regularly with things that you might find useful, like audio listening comprehensions, some PDFs, observations, reflections, and it's a place where you can communicate a bit more directly with me if you want to. So join me there if that sounds like your kind of thing. Again, the link is in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.